Welcome everyone to Chapter 9, Part 2. The topics are Foreign Policy and the World War, India and the Second World War, after the Second World War, the United Nations Organization. Now let's begin with the first topic, Foreign Policy and the World War. In early 1933, Hitler gave assurances of adopting peaceful policies, saying his main objective was to terminate the humiliating terms of the Versailles Treaty and gain an honorable status for Germany. But he wanted Germany to regain the territory it had lost in 1919. So he adopted a policy of rearmament and slowly built up a strong army backed by aircraft, tanks, and submarines. In 1935, Hitler announced conscription to the Air Force and Army in direct violation of the Versailles Treaty. He also reintegrated the Saar Valley into Germany and after carrying out a referendum. In March 1936, German soldiers retook the Rhineland. Also in 1936, Hitler signed an agreement with Mussolini's fascist Italian government and Japan to jointly oppose Russia in the war. In the same year, he sent his army to the aid of the fascist military dictatorship in Spain to test his new weapons and military systems. Figure 9.9, a 1936 satirical cartoon by well-known cartoonist David Lowe. Hitler is shown walking onto his goal on the back of the spineless leaders of democracy. Towards the end of 1939, he signed a non-aggression pact with Russia under which both countries agreed not to attack each other. In September 1939, Germany invaded and captured Poland. Following the surrender, the Germans rounded up the Jews, intellectuals, elite class, teachers, etc. in Poland and executed them to prevent the emergence of a new leadership in the country. The inhuman treatment of the Polish population stunned the world. In 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany in support of Poland. This step scaled up the war into a world war. Germany quickly worked out its war strategy, attacking northern Europe and France by mid 1940 and entering North Africa to attack Britain's colonies. Italy and Japan declared they would ally with Germany, the three together forming the Axis powers. In 1941, Japan attacked the USA and the Germany attacked the Soviet Union, that means the Russia. The entry of the USA and the Soviet Union into the war was a defining moment. Russia was not militarily prepared to face the German assault in the beginning and was forced to retreat. But in 1942 to 43, Hitler's victorious army faced defeat for the first time at the hands of the Soviet army in the city of Stalingrad. After that, the Soviets keep advancing till they captured Berlin, the German capital. Hitler committed suicide before the fall of Berlin. Figure 9.10, the Battle of Stalingrad. Humanity had never before seen a war as destructive and merciless as the Second World War. On one side, there was Germany's genocide of the Jews and Japan's inhuman treatment of prisoners of war. On the other hand, dropping atomic bombs on defenseless civilians shook the world's conscience. The war claimed the lives of 225 lakh soldiers and about twice that number, around 500 lakh of civilians were killed. Around 60 lakh Jews were sent to their death in the Holocaust, while 2 lakh 50,000 people perished in minutes in Nagasaki. Russia suffered the highest number of casualties, the estimates ranging from 200 to 400 lakh, or around 20% of the country's population. Figure 9.11 showing a scene of the destruction caused by the atom bomb in Nagasaki. Hannah's suitcase. The Second World War was the first time in history that more civilians than soldiers were killed in a war. It was also the first war in which all civilians, that means male and female, had to work for the war effort, with the economy of the countries involved in the fighting almost entirely directed to produce armaments for the war. In a way, the two world wars in the 20th century were a consequence of the important changes that had taken place in the 19th century, such as the formation of nation states that began to see other nation states as their sworn enemies, industrialization that made it possible to manufacture huge quantities of armaments, workers who could be sent to the war front for several years, democracies that could incite war hysteria in their people, scientific progress that made it possible to manufacture tanks and machine guns, poison gas chambers, bomber aircraft, and the atom bomb, unparalleled for its destructive capability. The first 50 years of the 20th century witnessed these horrific episodes because human society could not control the institutions it had created for its own well being. Instead, humans lost their humanity to cross the limits of bestiality. India and the Second World War. So, what was the role of India in the Second World War? Once again, in 1939, the British government thrust India into the war without consulting the people. The Indian Army was dispatched to Burma and Singapore to fight the Japanese and to Africa to fight the Germans and Italians. Large quantities of material such as a food grain and clothing were purchased for the army, leading to a sharp increase in prices and scarcity of goods in the market. The most horrendous consequence of the society was the Bengal Famine of 1943, in which 30 lakh people died of starvation or perished in epidemics. The famine did not occur because of low harvest of grain, but because grain was bought in large quantities by the government for the army, leading to the scarcity in the market. Taking advantage of the situation, traders began hoarding grain in the hope of reaping huge profits. The government could have acted to save the people by distributing adequate quantities of grain, but the colonial government did not take any steps in this direction. Indian traders and industrialists thus earned huge profits and became wealthy because of the demand created by the war. The nationalist movement in India was sharply divided on the policy to adopt towards the World War. Some people felt that India should see the war as an opportunity to join hands with Germany and Japan to oust the British from the country. Prominent among them was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who organized the Azad Hind Army in Singapore with the help of Germany and Japan, advancing towards Nagaland and Manipur. Leaders like Gandhiji, Nehru, and Patel were opposed to this line of action. They believed that India should not support the genocidal, anti democratic policies of Germany and Japan. They felt that India could continue its fight for freedom from British rule without support from Germany. In pursuit of this policy, Gandhiji launched the Quit India movement in 1942, in which millions of common people joined with great enthusiasm. The communists, however, felt that defeating Hitler to save global democracy and socialism was the most important immediate priority. Hence, they felt that Britain should not be opposed until the war was over. Once the war was over, all three streams of thought came together, with Nehru and other Congress leaders striving to protect the Azad Hind soldiers and the Communist Party again becoming active in the freedom movement. One important outcome of the war was that Britain became weak internationally while the USA and the Soviet Union emerged as the most powerful global powers. This created the right conditions for India to win its freedom from British rule. Now, what happened after the Second World War? Soviet Union, USA and Britain were the principal forces that defeated Hitler. These three nations decided that the first priority was to dismantle the Nazi regime and identify the Nazi leaders who could be punished for the human massacres. Punishment was duly meted out to the Nazi leaders for the heinous crimes, but only 11 of them were sentenced to death. The rest were either merely imprisoned or received life sentences, which were inadequate considering the crimes they had committed. This was because the victorious nations did not want to take an excessively harsh stand against Germany as had been done in Versailles. The map of Europe was redrawn once again after the war. The regions of Europe that were liberated by the Soviets became part of the Soviet sphere of influence, while the remaining regions and Japan came under the influence of the USA. Thus, East Germany came under Russia influence, while West Germany came under US influence. Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary and Yugoslavia were established as independent nations but remained under the Soviet sphere of influence. Similarly, West Germany, France, Holland, Italy, Greece and some other countries also became independent nations but remained under US influence. In Japan, the government remained the emperor, but fresh elections were held under US supervision and a new government was formed that adopted a new democratic constitution. Both the US and Soviet Russia formulated plans to redevelop the economies under their respective spheres of influence so that the countries whose economies had been destroyed by the war could once again tread the path of progress. Meanwhile, a proposal was formulated to carve out a new nation for the Jews from their traditional city of Jerusalem and the adjoining areas. This land belonged to the people of Palestine, so the Arabs protested against the formation of the new nation in their midst. However, the Jewish state was established in 1948 with the help of the US government and was called Israel. Figure 9.13, the victorious leaders Stalin, USSR, Roosevelt, USA, and Churchill, that Britain, in Tehran in 1943. The United Nations Organization. Attempts to form a new international organization began from the time Germany was staring at defeat in the war. The leaders of Britain, Soviet Russia and the USA met several times to discuss the future global order and the framework of the proposed organization. After the war ended in October 1945, 50 countries together formed the United Nations Organization. Its main objective was to establish world peace and encourage mutual support and cooperation between countries for their economic development. Its guiding principles were respect for the internal power structure of every country, justice in international relations, and encouraging human rights and social development within countries. The reasons for the failure of the earlier League of Nations was borne in mind while constituting the new organization. The League of Nations was run on the basis of consensus between its main member country, and it had no statutory power to enforce its decisions. In forming the UN, attention was paid to ensuring that the main member nation had the required military strength to enforce any major decision that had their backing. At that time, five major countries were given a special place in the organization: the USA, Britain, France, Soviet Union, and China. These five countries were made permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, each having the power to reject a decision to which objections were raised. This power was called veto right. If there was consensus between these five nations on an issue, then they could jointly implement it. In addition to the Security Council, the UN also had a General Assembly constituted by all its member nations, in which many issues were discussed and decisions taken. Apart from this, an International Court of Justice, that is ICJ, was also established to settle disputes between countries, ensure observance of international law, and oversee proper implementation of treaties. Such as several agencies were set up to foster development and cooperation between nations, such as the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, that is UNESCO, UNICEF and WHO, ILO, and UNCHR, etc. These are the organizations. Despite the many problems it has been facing over the past 70 years, the UN continues to work for world peace, development, and cooperation, and has till now successfully diffused issues that could escalate into a third world war. Thank you for watching.